Joey Lopez loves media, all kinds of media. That love of media was confirmed at UT Austin's ACTLab, where he was teaching assistant for Sandy Stone, the legendary academic and media theorist.
When I took soundscapes and Sandy was like, production's important, but why are you making this? What are you making? What's the story? What is sound? Why does sound matter? Like, what was sound and what will sound be? Like, it was just intoxicating. And so, um, I just really latched on to that to the extent that I ended up taking a plethora of classes with her on multiple topics. And it's also where I learned HTML. I learned HTML and Notepad at the ACTLab. And by the second semester, I was making websites for hi-fi companies. And that would end up being like a $500 to $1,000 a month side gig that I did all the way through my PhD. I was hosting either a dealer or importer level websites for gear that they were selling. And that was really fun. And I learned it all in the ACTLab.
In this episode of the Plutopia podcast, we discussed ACTLab, high-end audio gear, and Joey's work at Texas A&M's Media and Gaming Lab.
Hey everybody, the Plutopians have landed. John Lebkowski and Scoop Sweeney of the Plutopia News Network joining you today with our guest, Joey Lopez. Joey's an assistant professor of practice at the Texas A&M. He's a director of the Department of Communications Media and Gaming Lab there, which I hope that we'll talk about quite a bit. He's a polymath of sorts, and his works range from Chicana feminism to automotive journalism to hardware and software development cheerleading. And I grabbed that from Joey's bio. Joey, that sounds crazy. You do everything.
It keeps me really busy.
I bet. You have such a mix of fascinations.
Yeah, what I do a lot of is facilitating. Ultimately, I'm like an anthropologist. I love studying culture and being submerged in different cultures. And so I really kind of just latch on to what people want to do and their interests. And I have very few personal agendas and interests that I project onto others. Typically, it's if I have a project, I'm kind of just doing it on the side in parallel to everything else that's going on, which I do have a couple of those, so it's fun.
I guess I got to ask you about that picture on your wall back there of Harry Truman.
Yeah, there is a story. So you're in no way off
tell
basis
me.
there.
Let me know.
Well, this is my nerdy room, my wife and I's nerdy room, I should say, or the family nerdy room. I don't know. And so behind me are my bicycles and my wife's and I's bicycle. They're hooked up to trainers. We ride on virtual worlds. It's called Zwift. And then I have my whole nerdy setup this side, and so I have a bunch of different art from friends. And so that photo is a photo one of my friends took. His name was Creston Funk. And when he was a kid, he went out to the San Antonio National Airport and kind of just went through the people there and just snapped this photo. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, one of his friends that owns a print shop used this really high-end scanner to scan the negative. And then they did this thing called an iris print, which was like a really high-end uh, ink pigment process, like a high-end inkjet printer that worked on this rotating drum. And so the print itself, I don't know how much it cost physically, but it was significant. I mean, probably over $1,000 just for the print, and it got mounted um, by a frame shop in San Antonio. And so when my friend Creston passed away, his family gave me this print. And then at our shop in San Antonio, I have a hi-fi store. I guess I should mention that. I have a hi-fi store where we sell high-end audio electronics that are handmade in England and the US and Europe in general. And Creston also took a photo of John F. Kennedy and Jackie right before he passed away, the day before he passed away when he came to San Antonio and was in the convertible. So he's got this really eerie but cool photo of Jackie kind of waving at him because he was on a little stool standing, so he was like propped up above people getting his photo. He was just a kid getting this photo. And you may have met Creston at one point in Austin when we all would hang out, but he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. And he was the other like highly influential mentor. Him and Sandy played a big role in molding Sandy Stone, I should say, played a big role
Yeah.
in kind of who I am and how I get to do what I love every day. It's
And I
amazing.
met you through Sandy,
Yeah.
and you were working as Sandy's TA at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I was in the
Teaching
ACTLab at UT
assistant.
Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was UT Austin
So
was
how did you get
formative.
hooked up there?
Well,
Tell me how you got into the ACTLab.
it's I believe I went to a talk. She had these amazing talk series all the time, every year. And I started off in 99. I want to say it was like either the spring of 2000, something like that, that I found out about it, and or spring of 2001. And then next thing I know, I'm taking a soundscapes class with Sandy, and I just never looked back. I mean, I never looked back. That space was intoxicating. It was a 60 by 40 foot by 30-foot room that had a thrust stage, lighting grid, a sound system. It had like 20 Macs on one side, 20 PCs. I mean, it was like just it had an aura to it, like a recording studio that you would go to. And I had taken recording engineering classes when I was 16 at a recording studio because instead of playing football, that was what I was into, was learning about audio. I got into audio when I was like 6 years old. And by the time I was like 12 to 14, I was building all my own sound systems and wanting to record. And so somehow I ended up learning to do multi-track recording and about all kinds of microphones when I was 15 and 16, taking recording classes at a studio in San Antonio. And it was a real like purpose-built, double floated studio, like meaning the studio was floated within the building. And I hadn't, you don't you don't see that very often. I don't know how many of those you see. Usually it's a building that someone puts a studio in. This was a purpose-built studio. So you would open up one door and then that door would go to the exterior, the exterior's interior, and then you'd open the next door and then that's the street. And I always thought that was just a really crazy experience. So when I took soundscapes and Sandy was like, production's important, but why are you making this? What are you making? What's the story? What is sound? Why does sound matter? What was sound and what will sound be? Like it was just intoxicating. And so, um, I just really latched on to that to the extent that I ended up taking a plethora of classes with her on multiple topics. And it's also where I learned HTML. I learned HTML and Notepad at the ACT Lab. And by the second semester, I was making websites for hi-fi companies. And that would end up being like a $500 to $1,000 a month side gig that I did all the way through my PhD. I was hosting either a dealer or importer level websites for gear that they were selling, and that was really fun. And I learned it all in the ACT Lab. It was really really cool. I learned all about servers. I learned about Unix, Linux, Debian. I mean, just all the meat and potatoes of being a nerd like happened. And read Neuromancer. I mean, everything you can imagine. Learning about cyberpunk and meeting this guy named John Lebkowski, who introduced me to Bruce. Was it Bruce Sterling? I can't remember Bruce's last name.
Yeah, Bruce Sterling and Cory
Yeah,
Doctorow and all
yeah. I
those
met
guys.
Corey, and I would go on to seeing Corey over and over again for all the way into the 20 teens, just running into him in Austin because you kept you kept facilitating, and you've kept facilitating EFF Austin, and it's been like this nice long slow burn, this light that doesn't ever go away in a very good way. And it's made these multi-generational collisions happen, and it's something I've really enjoyed. I mean, I know I'm an old foger because I talk about Facebook, but I mean I love Facebook in terms of being able to see all the different kinds of people that are on there and all the kinds of events that are still happening in Austin. That you're not going to see that on a lot of other platforms. So the EFF Austin updates about all the different talks that are coming up. I mean, that's on my radar every day. That's stuff that I love getting to see.
Well, how did you get involved with high-end audio? That's quite a high atmosphere thing. Yeah, it's not the stuff you get at Radio Shack.
Right. Well, my dad, my dad was a busy person, and he worked a lot. And so w- but at the same time, around the age of 12 was when I was the youngest of four, or am the youngest of four. And they all started going off to college, kind of getting things settled in. And so my dad had a little more time for me at that point. And so he saw I was like taking stereos apart, and he was kind of getting not frustrated, but just kind of like, what are you doing to our house, And so he bought me a bunch of books. We went to the bookstore and he got me a book on building speakers, a book on electronics, and then he accidentally, I say accidentally because he didn't know what he was doing, bought me a book about high-end audio. And suffice to say, I read that book inside and out, and it's tethered, and I mean tethered, sorry. And I'm on like the second, print I have of it. I've given other copies away, and that was when I was about 15. My dad really did. I mean, he really was concerned because, as you just said, I mean, it's not inexpensive, right? So I ended up working all summer when I was 16 years old and saving up to buy my first hi-fi. I bought an NAD amplifier, integrated amplifier, and some Wharfdale speakers. It was this place called Concert Sound. They sold British oriented hi-fi, so Tannoy and Lynn and Name and all these. Whereas before they had sold like Mark Levinson and like AR, Acoustic Research and all these other brands. And so yeah, that's how I got into it. And I say my dad like kind of regret it because, and he kind of regret kind of regretted me going into RTF too, because I mean I play a lot. My life is a playground. And I'm very lucky and fortunate. And I'm very lucky and fortunate to have realized that when I was about 20. When I was about 20 years old, I realized like I am getting to play in ways that most people go to work for, and they don't like their job, and so I've lived that way this whole time, and it was fun, but it was a little stressful for my parents and my family, admittedly, because they all are very successful people in their own right. I mean, I have a brother that's a electrical engineer. His wife's an electrical engineer. My sister's a pharmacist. I mean, her husband's a pharmacist. Like, they have like these professional trajectories, and I'm over here going like, I'm making crazy art, and I want to do open source software development. I don't care about making money. I love high end audio, but I don't care about necessarily being the person that has millions of dollars to buy that kind of equipment. And so my family is just looking at me like, what is going to become, of this guy? I got married pretty young at 22. Yeah. 23. I just turned 23. That's right. And so it was an adventure, doing the hi-fi stuff. And I'll tell you that it took, I can't remember my age, but I want to say I was about 40, 41, during COVID, I think it was, or right before COVID. At the shop, I ordered a $10,000 CD player, and I had it shipped to my parents because I was in College Station here, and I wanted it to go to a place that I know like they're gonna get it, sign for it, and put it in the house kind of thing. And And so when I picked it up from my dad, that was the first time my dad was just like, "This is awesome. Like I can't believe like I mean, I can't wait to hear this thing. This is going to be amazing." And I was just like, "Wow, my this is just normal talk," instead of my dad going like, "What are you doing? What are you doing with your shop? Why are you buying these?" Like, like, why do you have this thing and who is going to buy it? And, I've sold multiple of them since. But yeah, no, that's and so but really like so that
Why
was
would a
like
CD player cost $10,000? That's a lot.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, what did you get for $10,000?
So it uses a FF or F what is it called? The FPGA, field programmable gate array. And those are now really, really popular. But this guy who went to MIT designs they're called a resolution audio cantata. They still sell them. They're for sale. And he has been building CD players since around 95. And so the digital to analog section on that system is his own design, and it's a 32-bit 784 megahertz processor, and so it can also do DSD interpolation, which is direct stream, like 1-bit interpretation, and it can do up to 512 uh, uh, bit stream.
So the sound
And
is radically different?
oh yeah, it's yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah, it's
I
radically
want one of
different.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then it has multiple inputs. You can also use it as a preamp. You can also get like a moving coil or moving magnet phono section to put in it, and it will run all analog. It's not going to digitize it, but it'll run it as an input. And so a lot of times customers will get that, use it as a full like digital analog front end, and then have power amplifiers, which they build for them. They build 100-watt monoblocks for about $10,000, but I also sell stuff that costs $2,000 for everything, the turntable, the amp, and the speakers. So, and they're all handmade. All of this is handmade. This is, and it
I know.
is not designed one place and manufactured somewhere else. So that's another thing that's really different about it. It's a cottage industry. You're buying from people that are, well paid and have good work conditions. That's the
I
other
thought I
reason.
was doing well. They have a nice Yamaha receiver and some clipped speakers,
You
but
are.
I feel kind of lame now. That is
No,
pretty
no, no.
good. I mean,
You
we have good sound here.
the one thing I always make clear about high-end audio is that it's about the music. I don't care what hi-fi you have. If you're enjoying music, you're enjoying music. I'm not going to question it. I'm not here to like press what I have. Oh, what's the best? If you don't have it, then you're this or that or blah blah. It's like, hey, if you're enjoying your music, like, who am I to come tell you otherwise? I
Yeah, I'm
I
kind of
just
blown away by Dolby Atmos now, but I mean, I don't have a Dolby Atmos system. I'm just like
yeah.
5.1.
Well, I'm just literally do two
Um,
channel. That's what we do. It's two speakers, stereo. That's it. Even for my movies, like when I watch movie, and I love surround sound, and I love Dolby Atmos is. I mean, it's very immersive. Listen to a lot of them, and they're really fun. But you also end up like spending a lot of time and money, especially if you want to go high end audio. I mean, you can just spend 100K to have the same kind of two-channel experience, but surround sound. I mean, it multiplies it now by so many speakers and amplifiers that I mean, and in a weird way, it kind of prices me out as someone that wants to do it. And then people want it to control their lights. They want it to control their, bidet. I don't know. I'm just gonna be facetious, but like, they want the home integration at that point. And that's now we're not listening to music. We're barely talking about movies, and that's where I get like, I did tech support. We've all done
well,
tech support. How much fun is that? You know,
I suppose if you take some existing like musical work and remaster it for Dolby Atmos, you've actually made a different sound, and it's not
yeah,
really the same
it's
sound
just
that.
totally different. I mean, I've listened to high-end audio surround sound systems, and they're amazing. I mean, the best one I heard was around 2002, 2003. Like personally heard, like I went and was a S80 CD, which is Super Audio CD, which is made by Sony. and uses that bit stream disk I was talking about, the protocol. It's 1 bit at 2.83 or something like that megahertz, and a sampling rate. And it was a 5.1 setup, and we played Dark Side of the Moon, and in a good surround sound mix with good surround sound system, you should be able to not feel weightless, but it should be able to like put you in a different space, and it feels weird in a good way. Like it's just really but that was like, I don't know, $150,000 then system. I mean, it was crazy. I was just like,
Well, that's the thing to listen to on that sort of system. The thing I
yeah.
love about Pink Floyd's attention to detail and to really quality sound. Anytime I want to test out some equipment, I'll take along a couple of CDs of some of their better productions, and if it sounds good on the equipment you're testing out, then that gear is probably pretty good because it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and and then I'm a cultural anthropologist, right, at the same time. So then like that's a whole nother discussion, is like, what do people bring? And then also, what do I personally take to go hear systems? Like, and it's generational, it's cultural, it's societal, like depending on like how you grew up and what you listen to and what matters to you musically, acoustically. And so it's really fun. I mean, yeah, Dark Side of the Moon is one that like, yeah, definitely every hi-fi shop probably has a copy of it. I mean, I know we do, and we have 2 locations and we have 2 copies of it, and we know where to get it for streaming. I mean, like it's definitely one. The Dire Straits, like in the 80s and 90s, that was a huge one that people would play, and really test a system out with. Daft Punk is like a contemporary one that a lot of people test with.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I had the good fortune to work in some nice recording studios in LA when I was managing bands and doing label work, and I got to learn what was really important from the engineers. I had some great engineers, and like my setup here in my studio, a couple of nice JBL speakers and Yamaha NS10
Mm-hmm.
monitors, which are great for really determining that what you're producing is going to sound good to anyone, because the NS10s are kind of the lowest common denominator speakers, to where if it sounds good on a boom box or on NS10s, then
Yeah.
it's probably recorded properly.
Yeah. I mean, NS10s are every single studio I've been to has NS10s. I mean, and if they don't, they have an equivalent to it. The other one that's been real popular lately are Avintones or Auratone, like single driver little speakers. A lot of people are putting those on as little like super near fields, um, to do listening to tracks on and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I mean the whole hi-fi part was so all of this happens in parallel. So I'm doing all this hi-fi, and I do that, and then around when I go to ACTLab, I learn how to make websites. I go to a hi-fi store that's literally across the street from where I'm going to class. It was right by Kirby Lane on 26th and Guadalupe. Yeah, 26th by the 7-Eleven that's still there somehow. And I think it's a tattoo shop now, is what the hi-fi shop was, where it was. And and I started talking to the guy, and he said he needed a website. I said I could do one. I traded him some hi-fi, and he was super supportive of it. And at the exact same time in San Antonio, the hi-fi shop I had bought hi-fi from, one of the owner was there, but the I guess his lifelong business partner, I is what I would call him. His name's Mark Heaston. Was leaving. He was moving to Ohio. And so what ended up happening was I ended up kind of just making their website for them in San Antonio, and then just running a hi-fi store for like 10 years. And we became importers of hi-fi. I learned all about imports and duties and taxes, and it was really like this crazy journey. And then the other thing about selling hi-fi is that you just meet all kinds of interesting people. I mean, people that can afford hi-fi, like, I don't know how many Porsches I got to ride in, and Ferraris, and, BMWs, and just really learn as an anthropologist, which I didn't know I was doing at the time. Looking back, this is how I describe it. But at the time it was just a ride, and I'm a huge car person. So I did my dissertation on. And so I just met all these people, and then I was going to UT at the same time and meeting all these technically minded people, getting my mind molded by the ACTLab in a really cool way. And in San Antonio, what ended up happening was I brought up my friend Creston Funk, the one that took this photo. He was my hi-fi mentor. I've owned Concert Sound. I brought him up, and he was just like, "I like this place. I'm gonna move." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm moving." And like he had lived in San Antonio for like 57 years, his whole life. And he just like picked up and moved everything and moved down in downtown, right off Third and Bowie at the Gables Lofts right there. And I moved down there with my wife, and we like opened up a shop, and it was craziness ensued on all levels. And that was where like uh ACTLab and Hi-Fi really started to meld together. It's where I met this guy named Jerry Chamkis, which I don't know, John, if you ever met Jerry, but he did radio, like
I don't
pirate
think
radio
so.
work. And so we met him at Gallery Lombardi, which is like since torn down. And he had this thing called a Cosmophone, and it was a he called it a cosmic ray detector. He used liquid nitrogen to cool this sensor down that would pick up on cosmic rays and then convert it to MIDI and play like noise music. And so it was like his art installation there, and we hit it off. And then he ended up meeting Sandy, and then ended up coming to the ACTLab, and like the amount of collisions that happened out of that and bar camps. I got into bar camps with John and everybody else, and um it was this time where things were just really vibrant, and John and I were meeting all kinds of people in parallel. Like it wasn't like John and I were hanging out together, but everybody I would meet had met John. If I was going to, what was the co-working space on the east side? They had a house.
Conjunctured.
Yeah. If I was going to Conjuncture, it'd be like,
Conjunctured.
"Oh, have you got to meet this guy, John Lepkowski." And I'd be like, "I know John,
Yeah, I was there all the time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. If I met new Jennifer Navarrete in San Antonio, and she was like, "You got to meet John Lepkowski." I'm like, "I know her. I know
That
him."
was such a great time. It really was. I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean, it was
it's
a
kind of
time.
gone now.
What was it? Because it
I
was,
wish that we could.
oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I wish that we could recreate or revive the community
Yeah.
that we had then, because we had I mean, this goes all the way back to the early 90s. Austin definitely had a whole slew of like early adopters of internet and forward-looking technologies and open source, all of those things. And there was a community around that. We had the robot group, and Fringeware. We started Fringeware. And people just kind of showed up, and hung around. And a lot of those people have gone now, and some are still here, but they're not really like connecting the way that they used to. And then in the era when like co-working started to happen, and eventually Conjuncture was founded there, and was there for, I don't know how many years they were operating there in East Austin, but that was a whole other thing where people were getting kind of more entrepreneurial. And we had Bootstrap Austin, and we had Dorkbot was happening then too. And I know you were involved with Dorkbot. Explain what Dorkbot was.
Well, I'll talk about Dorkbot one second, but what's crazy about Conjunctured was that it came out of this thing called Jelly. Do you remember Jelly?
Jelly, right? Oh yeah, I remember Jelly. I was
Yeah.
a Jelly person.
Yeah, so Jelly was this Friday meetup at a particular coffee shop. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me. And it was just
Cafe
co-working.
Caffeine. It was Cafe Caffeine.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't start drinking coffee till I was like 37. So it's like, all these coffee shops names like were beyond me at the time, because this was like when I was like 25. And so I'll just never forget, Caesar and Eric and John and those guys like
And Dusty.
and Dusty, yeah, Dusty, setting up a plan to start a co-working space, and then one week just not being there, and we were like, "Where did they go?" And they're like, "Well, they got the co-working space going. Like they're gone. Like they're at the co-working space, so you can go over there and see them." And I'm like, "Oh wow, okay, that's this really is happening." And like you said, like all of the what was interesting about that time was that there were people that were selfless with their time in a very unique way. And everyone knew that was part of this. Just had a feeling that like there was a reason to be selfless with your time, not just the camaraderie, but like there was a sum beyond the parts, right? Like there was more than what was being seen, because you can go to work and be more than some of the parts, but in a creative work environment, it's really powerful. And I think that was a lot of the aura that we saw. And one of those things like you're talking about that came out of it was Dorkbot. I think I ran into it when David Nunes was running it at the time. I can't remember who was running it. And then
Yeah,
and then that
I'm pretty sure it was David at the
like
time.
what was
Yeah,
her name? The unbelievably awesome woman that helped run it too at one point. She now does
I'm guessing on
bicycle
that.
gear. She does a cycling gear. And so, anyways, I just met all these amazing people, and so Dorkbot was fun with electricity, and it was a monthly meetup, and it was at different venues, and I just got to meet so many interesting people that were working on the fringe of both analog and digital art. You know, that was when we got to see the singing Tesla coils, and then that turned into Arc Attack, or I can't remember the name of Seven, and that group that ended up being on like television. And I mean, that was the crazy time of that era. Was that this was when I am I wrong, John, that you were also one of the people that helped kind of ideate a Dorkbot fair that turned into Maker Fair, and then Maker took over and kind of like uh
Well, the story about that was that I knew the editor of Make Magazine, and
right,
I heard about the Maker Faire that they did out in the Bay
which was
Area, and I
great. Yeah,
wrote
yeah,
him an email. I sent him an email, and I said, "You guys ought to do that in Austin."
yeah,
And I was shocked to hear an affirmative response. He said, "Hey, I talked this up over here, and that sounds like a great idea. I think we will." So
yeah,
they brought Maker Faire to Austin, and
yeah,
that was the start of Plutopia too. The first
yeah.
event that the kind of test event for Plutopia was the DIY Home of the Future
I remember
installation
that.
that we did at that particular Maker Faire, the first Maker Faire in Austin. And they did Maker Faire here, I don't know, a couple of years, and I think it was hard for them to produce it here. And what happened later was that they sort of cultivated local people to sort of do maker stuff. And I think other maker fairs happened after that, but they were locally organized. Maker Faire needed to not be a centralized thing, and and they knew that. I mean, they realized that.
Yeah, that was a really interesting time. The person that name that popped up when you talked about the future of the home is as Derek Woodgate. I remember Derek and
Yeah,
his lively personality. But yeah, and then
yeah.
there
Derek
were
had a lot of
yeah,
he had a lot of uh, background stuff from his various corporate futurist projects that could feed into things that we were doing with Plutopia.
I mean, and that was that
So
era
I,
of futurists, the singularity, where things were really hitting that point of fruition. Yeah, someone I use as kind of like an example of that era is Worley. If you knew
oh yeah,
William Hurley, like I'll never forget seeing
yeah.
him at like a bar camp and him telling me, yeah, I'm working on this project, and hopefully it takes off this time, and like, we'll see how it goes. You'll see me in 2 months and we'll know. And then like it wouldn't take off, and then the next time I talked to him, I want to say it was like 2009, 2010 was when he launched Chaotic Moon, you know, and then that took off, and then and then next thing I know, he's like on the
They were
lawn.
very
Yeah,
successful. Yeah.
yeah, he was on the lawn with, you know, the White House with Obama and Hillary, and you know, he's a VP at Goldman Sachs, and I'm like, all right, like we saw the full circle here, you know, like and then, you know, on the other flip side, during that time, I was still meeting and talking to a bunch of open source centric individuals and collaborating, and I ended up meeting not Nicholas Negroponte, um, the other guy from the Media Lab. Gosh dang, he stayed at my house. Would think I'd remember his name.
Joito? Was it Joito?
No, it's he's the one that worked on the one laptop per child. Um, I'll pull his name up. I'll find it. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. He
I should remember too.
yeah, he oh man, his name is like literally in my head and at the tip of my tongue, but I'm just not remembering it.
Nor am I. It's hard to
Yeah,
remember all of
I'm
these
trying to
names. There
remember
have
his
been so many
name.
people.
So
Um,
so yeah, anyways, I'll find it. I'm looking it up right now. But yeah, so I ended up going to having this conference in the mid 2000s, like 2010s. And I was at this place called Geekdom in San Antonio. It was like this San Antonio centric co-working space, and so it was funded by this billionaire. It was in downtown in a building, and so it really had some steam going into it, if that makes sense. It
I
really
I remember that. Is that the guy from what was it?
Rackspace.
The host Rackspace. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I mean, I'm trying to see if I'm still looking up the
Maybe it was Nicholas Negroponte
no, it's
because
his name. No, it's
he was one of the
Nicholas
boosters of
Negroponte
that.
was like the head, like the face of this project. But gosh, open. There we
Was it
go. Hello,
Seymour
John.
Papert?
No, it is. I'm gonna get him right. There we go. I found it. His name is Walter Bender.
Oh, Walter
And
Bender. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Walter Bender, and so I met someone that had gone to Uruguay and worked with him. She was a undergrad at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, and she was like, "I really want to have an open education resource conference," and I was like, "Let's do it." And she was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, whatever you want to do. You tell me what you want to do. I'll make it happen." And so we ended up having Walter Bender come. We had Joseph Prusa come, which I don't know if y'all know who Joseph Prusa is, but he makes 3D printers. He makes the Prusa Labs. Is a really pretty big printer at this point. And then a slew of other educators and people come and talk about hardware, software, and uh, um, uh, curriculum open source development, or Libre development. As I learned later, open source is not as open source as it sounds. Libre is the ultimate. And it is. I'm kind of poking fun, but it's when you and, you know, it's always interesting when you get into the fringe spaces, and nothing is ever like fringe enough. I think they take it one level more. But but yeah, and so then it would come full circle, and I'd end up seeing Corey, you know, Doctorow, giving talks about his latest books at Book People, and I ended up going to one right when, unfortunately, when Aaron Schwartz passed away. And man, did uh, did Corey give a talk about Aaron and his impact. And that was when I really started to understand like big data, which was not being called big data at the time. I was just talking about, you know, looking at data sets and the impact they have. And so, so I was meeting people that were in that space, and I was going up to Boston and San Antonio. I was building it out. I helped file 501c3 papers or documents for a makerspace there, and then I helped them raise like $13,000 to buy a 3D printer and not 3D printer, a laser cutter, and got really involved in this kind of community maker projects, like these STEAM oriented projects, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and the impact it can make in traditionally underserved spaces, like and like by GIS data, like underserved spaces, like some of the poorest zip codes. I ended up running latchkey after school programming and going with other makers to go and teach them about soldering, teach them about programming, just all kinds of different things using makeys, and just it was a really interesting time. And so that was when like Code for America. I don't know if y'all ever met with the Code for America people, but that was when there were like these kind of institutional open source and copy left initiatives going on, and all of those have since just had a really hard time with the commercialization of social media. I mean, the commercialization of social media has really hampered innovation. Um, but just like the internet. I mean, that's what happened to the internet. That's what happened to the personal computer. That's what, that's what happened to a lot of technology. And at the same time, it's driven some really great thing. I'm not throwing it out, but it's definitely made it so that, we're at a point where we're adversarial with our social media platforms. We're sitting there wondering, are they a publisher or are they a utility? Because like you can't be both at the same time, but evidently you can.
You have quite a history with a lot of great projects, but let's talk redirect a little and talk about the future of media.
Okay.
And you talk to us about what's going on with the Media and Gaming Lab. That's probably the home of a lot of the media's future.
Yeah. Well, the future is a really interesting topic right now. I teach popular culture and I teach advanced social media. I also I teach a technology and society class, and so this topic and this discussion is something that is just very it's deep right now. There's no like, well, this is what it's gonna be. It's so I'll give you some like little motifs. Um, One, nobody knows what truth is right now. Truth is very relative. So it's very hard to come to a consensus in a room of what truth is. So one of the things I've done in my teaching is to not talk about truth. Instead, I talk about situations and occurrences and purported pasts, purported happenings, and I ask my audience to decide. Instead of me saying this is what happened, I say this is what's purported to happen. You decide. And the more educated we are, the hopefully the better decisions we can make about what we believe happened and what's happening and what might happen. And so that's like one of the, and it sounds so rudimentary and simple, but gosh dang it, if not right now, like we are having the hardest time just doing that in a room of people that don't that in a room of people that disagree, right? So that's right off the bat, is that we have truth is very, very relative to who you're around and where you are and geographically, all kinds of stuff. Then some other things are real-time manipulation. We have an issue with real-time manipulation. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have artificial intelligence that's already being deployed and used by both our governments and big institutions and corporations. They've already implemented it. It's not if, it's already being used. And those implications are things that are hard to see, right? So one of the things that I use to describe how to understand big data and possibly the future just a real simple a demonstration. If we have a y-axis and an x-axis, right? If the x-axis is time and the y-axis are all, like we use our phone here, for example, all the inputs and data that's being collected over time on our phone, right? So right now it's GPS. If I'm moving my phone, it's got a gyro. It's looking at G's. If I have an Apple Watch on, which I don't, it's got my heart rate, right? Um, Photos that I've taken, apps that are open, apps that are pinging right now, apps that are looking at what other people on other networks are doing right now. Those kinds of things, right? If we were to write them down and put them on the y-axis, right? We then go across time. So, a second, 10 seconds, a minute, 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days, 10 years, so forth. We have a data set on us, right? That's pretty easy to see. It's pretty easy to understand. The hard one I think, for society to understand is the z-axis, right? It's this axis that goes out. And that axis is everybody has those data sets. And it's these calculations that these big companies are doing in real time or near real time at this point that we can't see or feel, but that we're feeling on the output. Kind of like when we talked about traditionally with television being a one-way medium, right? Like television, it's this Marshall McLuhan, silver bullet direct into you kind of thing. Big data, media companies are using big data in that way. We don't know we're being manipulated. It's this z-axis that we're not physically seeing or hearing, but is being pushed back at us. So if you're at any age, any generation, you might go, okay, well, they got all my data. But then we go, okay, well, they have my pulse. They have all kinds of medical data is now being generative and being timed and kept. What if we start doing our real-time glucose, right? Real-time blood pressure, real-time, all of these things. And they're great. I'm a diabetic and have high blood pressure. I'd love to have all that information, right? Like, that'd be great. But it's how the companies are going to use it in that z-axis, in that way that I don't know that's going to be very, very problematic, right? So it's gonna help me, but we're not. But because capitalism isn't driven by the betterment of others, it's the betterment of the company. We don't know if that z-axis is truly benefiting us or partially benefiting us, and there's so much if how much is left on the table, if that makes sense. And
it seems like it would be hard for us to really know for sure whether, not just what are they doing, but whether what they're doing is actually working and actually having an effect. I mean, Corey says, in response to a lot of the talk about how Facebook manipulates people, that sort of thing, Corey says, well, nobody has a mind control, Ray, and I've thought about that a lot. I assumed for a long time that, people were just kind of being led alone by the sort of thing that you're talking about. And then I came to question whether I can actually know that or not, so I don't assume anymore. I think it's such a big unknown,
I agree with you. And at the same time, we know that it's happening. I mean, you say something and your phone hears it and then you get an advertisement for it. So we know that at the very least, if you're super tech centric, that's not magic to us, but that's magic to normal people.
Well, there's stuff being pushed out onto that z-axis that's really scary now. Biometric data. There are people,
that's what I was really getting at.
That want to buy that, sell your iris scan, sell your thumbprint, sell your voice.
And what's hard about it is that you have medical companies and then insurance companies and then you have premiums and then you have how insurable you are, right? And right now, I think, just kind of like we're talking about the phone and talking into it and things coming up, I don't think we're being affected by it right now, but you're asking about the future, right? And I think in the future, it's just too low hanging a fruit for them not to do it. Does that make sense? It's like it's too low hanging a fruit to think they won't. they'll at least try. And like you said, how effective will it be? That'll be proof. The proof is in the pudding in that one.
Well, if
But
you
that
I mean,
is,
if
yeah,
it's effective, they'll do it and they'll keep doing it. But
right.
uh, another question is, what kind of metrics can they use to decide how effective it really is?
Right. Well, so, when I came over to Texas A&M, one of the things that they have that's different than what I was used to in RTF or even Convergent Media at UIW is that we have a communication health major. So we do communication health. And so I got really nerdy into that because my sister's a pharmacist, as I mentioned, and my sister used to run a drug information lab at UIW where I taught before. And now she does informatics for the city and does epidemiology and things like that. So I think about big data and health statistics constantly. I had her come and do a couple of workshops and lectures on it, and I'll continue to have her come because when you look at teen pregnancy and you overlay GIS data, right? When you look at diabetes or high blood pressure and you overlay food scarcity, cultural deserts, resources to fresh food and things like that, that's where HEB comes in. HEB has people that are informatic, data science specialists that know all of that data. If you go to, I don't know if y'all know this, but there are different HEBs in different parts of town, right? No HEB is equal. And
Yeah,
and and
absolutely.
and,
I can see that.
and those are I mean I love HEB. I at them for my Instagram on my barbecue. Like I love I'm a but the reality is that I'm a capitalist too, and I understand the need to make money and have data and stay open, and that's going to drive people to have this more and more finite data. And so the question is, when do you do something about it? Right? Like, for example, just a real simple example. I take a bunch of generic medications for my blood pressure and diabetes, right? So I take metformin, which is a generic, take metoprolol, which is a generic, and benazepril. Like those are three generics I'll mention, right? Now, if I go to HEB and I tell them I take these, they may, or if I go to any pharmacy and I tell them I'm taking these, they'll be like, "What's your insurance?" And they'll run my insurance, and my copay is $15 for a 30-day supply, $45 for a 90-day supply. Well, that's great, right? Well, the generic sheet says that if I don't use my insurance, it's $20 for a 90-day supply. Okay. Well, why doesn't this computer system, the POS system, just know that? Go like, hey, you don't need to use insurance on this. You can go ahead and use a generic, right? So I agree with you that some systems are not going to be enabled to be advantageous using AI. But I often wonder if they're going to be at the detriment of it not being as profitable, and things like that. So then you go and you when like the medication field is just a racket. I mean, it's just a total racket. So uh you really have to shop around and look to find out what, and it's funny because I'm old. I don't look old, but if you looked at the medications I took, I'd look old. And so I know a lot about pricing. And then with my sister still works professionally as a pharmacist on the weekends. And so, I understand what that space looks like in terms of are pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, and doctors able to work past their capitalistic obligations for the betterment of humanity? That's a tough question. I'm not here to say yay or nay, but again, let's look at some data. Let's look and see what's being said in different spaces, right? And that's, for me, that's a lot of the future. That's where that truth is hard because, I want to make money. I want people that I want pharmacists to make good money, but I also don't want them overprescribing. I don't want them overselling. I mean, we talk about like lack of data. It's like we had this opioid epidemic and acted like we didn't know where it came from. Or all these, drugs are coming. I'm like, they're all prescribed. You know where they're coming from. You know all the numbers. Like, yes, it was a gravy train, and nobody wanted to say anything. But this was not somebody slinging dope on the side of the street. These were all accounted for, went through, prescription pads, went through the pharmacy fulfillment, went through the insurance companies, and everybody was just like, whatever, whatever. This is
Yeah, well,
gravy,
it was
you know?
greed. It was greed. They were greedy and they were trying to claim that these drugs were less addictive than they were in order to sell more of them,
So,
and they were convincing doctors of that. That was kind of crazy.
yeah, so I'm not trying to get conspiratorial. I'm more just trying to say when I think the future, there's a reason we're skeptical, and one of the reasons we're skeptical is because we do know too much now. We do know more than we've ever known. In general, as a society, we can find out things really fast. We can make wrong decisions even quicker, you know, and be ignorant of things, even as an expert. As soon as we assume things, it's much quicker getting bit in it. That's one of the things I always try and always just like I'm always like this is my opinion when I'm in class. I don't I'm not while I'm an expert in this is changing. There are a lot of things I say now that are different than even 10, 20 years ago because the future is a really it's an interesting time in that I think for a while there, we were predicting the future either in doom or gloom or in some like like in a cyberpunk or post-apocalyptic kind of scenarios or in this like giddy way. And I think when we started seeing things like was it Black Mirror on Netflix and these other kinds of things that were like doing narratives about social media scores and looking at AI enableization or drone enableization in creepy ways. If we look at Mr. Robot, right, like the show Mr. Robot, and if you were really nerdy, you were like, wow, this is. I mean, I could barely watch it. I was just so depressed every time every time I'd watch it, I'd just be like, okay, we're gonna go do something fun after this, Joey. It'll be okay, because
Yeah, I used to read a whole lot of dystopian science fiction. Now I just read the newspaper. I mean, that can't, the sci-fi can't really compete with what's going on right now.
And so so for my students, I tell them and ask them and I ponder like what does it mean to be an agent of change? What does it mean to have agency? What drives you? What's going to drive you? What are some things that you're looking forward to? Because one of the hardest things I have right now with a lot of students is them thinking beyond finishing school and like and and what I mean by that is that a lot of them they're so rubric based they're like just tell me how to make an A, just tell me what I need to get an A. And in my class I mean I take that dial and I just turn it all the way down and slow it down and go, well, what is an A? What is a rubric? I turn into Sandy, Stone. And I start saying, hey, like this is a weird time, not like what's happening right now, but like in your life, college is weird. There's very few things in life where you go, I want to give you tens of thousands of dollars to sit and take tests. There are other people that are just going out and working. There are other people that don't care about college and are just going to go and do what they love. But you've decided to come here and put tens of thousands of dollars. This is the fleecing of America in many ways. Y'all are getting fleeced. What are you going to do? Like, what are your intangibles going to be? How are you going to be different? Both as someone that, yeah, you want to make money. And what about as a citizen? What about as a family member? Because I teach at A&M, they're pretty conservative. I'm like, what are you going to do for your community? Who are you? You know, and what can you make in this class or do in this class that's going to add value to that? And then what are you going to do here in college that's going to add value to that? Because, you know, we're sold on, like, you know, you go to school, you get good grades. Well, like, the reality is that life is hard for most people. Even the most successful, like, we end up questioning ourselves. We, you know, success is a moment more than an attitude. You know, it's like most people, it's like, yeah, you got your degree, now what? You got this, now what?
Yeah.
You're gonna always be like, now, like, even at work, you make 100,000. Like, that's another question I ask people a lot, just in general. I'm like, how much is enough money a month when you graduate? Is it $3,000 a month, 6,000, 12,000, 100,000, 100 million? I go, there are people in this world that all make that. So, you know, what your future looks like, you have to decide. And sometimes that money, you have to look at yourself and go, okay, now, yes, I'm making this money, but what's my mental health look like? What's my relationships with other people look like? You know, am I the person I want to be? Because you can make lots of money and be that, but it's, you know, it's great to be reflective at a young age, to be able to have that foresight. And that's what I was given, you know, that's what I was given at ACTLab, because I had that many, we had millionaires in our presence. We had people that had made lots of money. We had people that were living out of their car, you know, going to school and working jobs. And both were as competitive with each other in terms of intellect and ability and future potential, you know, for change. And change, and it could have even been financial, you know, financial change. I mean, I'll never forget, we had one student that worked at an anarchy bookstore when I met her. She's now a multimillionaire of a liqueur company. You know, her name's Amy Stedman.
Oh,
She was on
wow.
Shark Tank and got $1
Wow.
million in funding from Mark Cuban. Met her at a Monkey,
That's
you know, Monkey Wrench
fantastic.
Books, and was helping do like zine workshops. You know, I was there doing zine workshops with her. Super amazing person, you know, of Syrian descent. And that's what I kind of play out with my students and play out with the future of, like, all generations. You know, I mean, I look at Sandy and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm gonna be able to move like that at 86. I mean,
Yeah. She's a force of
I
nature.
wonder, you know, I just wonder. I'm like, am I gonna be able to do that?
Yeah.
Like, man, I'll be lucky if I can do that at 56, you know? Like, go ahead.
So, well, we're at the end of our hour,
Okay.
and it feels like a cliffhanger. And I'm wondering if you want to come back in a month or so and talk some more.
I'm happy to.
That'd be great.
Okay.
That'd be
Well,
great.
I really
Well,
appreciate
we really
you having
appreciate
me.
this.
Yeah.
It's enjoyable.
Well,
just
thank you for
hearing your history and your future. You've got a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to talk about. Maybe you could bring your sister next time too, and we can
oh yeah. Dude,
talk to her. That sounds pretty
the
interesting.
only problem
too.
with her and I is that we'll get
Anyway.
too punny. We both have kids. We're exempt from not being able to do puns. We can do puns because we have kids, and so we're just dangerous.
We have no rules against puns. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, we enjoyed it.
We'll follow up soon. This has been very enjoyable.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.